This is a very quick and easy one, is if you have a main character who you want to be kind of underdog syndrome, they're down on themselves for whatever reason, but they have friends who talk about how wonderful they are. You can establish a humble character who's also likable because they have friends who like them. A good example of this, there's lots of them around, but this is why we have sidekicks so often for one reason. We talk, Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Sherlock Holmes is a very off-putting character. Depending on the adaptation, he goes borderline sociopathic. But by putting into the book the stories Watson, who likes him and who is his friend, it makes us more affectionate and fond of him. Instead of looking at him as this insane person, we look at him as kind of our quirky friend because he's Watson's quirky friend. And so Watson does a lot of heavy lifting in the Sherlock Holmes stories because he does that. He provides a good means for explanation, and he provides a foil for Sherlock Holmes in a lot of ways. And so he's kind of basically anytime you're going to see like the duo, you're going to see someone fulfilling the Watson role where one of them is going to be quirky, but the other one likes them anyway, and they like each other. It's going to make you like both characters. Having friends is going to make you like the characters. It's just a simple fact of life. And in fact, a lot of times people characterize villains by giving them friends, love interests, people who care about them. George R. Martin is a genius at this. His characters are evil, awful people, and yet sometimes you really like them simply because of the interaction he shows them going through with people who actually do like them. And you say, oh, if this were my brother, I could see why you would be affectionate toward this person even though they're awful. Suddenly this is a character rather than just a cackling villain. So, just some basic means of making your character sympathetic. It's one of the main things you should, in most cases, be trying to do. I forgot quirks, which are kind of like that. Okay, so there you go. Oh, proactivity. Proactivity is a problem. Proactivity is difficult because, I believe I've mentioned this before, if the villains do nothing, then the main characters have nothing to do. You need to get around that by giving them things to do. And I guarantee you, if you're making the character proactive, if you show them doing stuff in the very beginning scene, rather than letting other people do stuff, then we're going to like them. Instead of saying, they're a stamp collector, to give them a quirk, show them in the opening scene, jumping through all sorts of hoops, working really hard to find this stamp that they love. Even if the stamp has nothing to do with the main plot, spending a chapter to show us all of this stuff is going to then show us a character who's willing to sacrifice their time, their talents, their energies in order to achieve their goals, which is going to make us immediately like them more. How do we start off Indiana Jones? Going through just all sorts of horrible things in order to get this idol. Nothing goes his way. He has to react a lot to things going poorly. But at the end of this sequence, we have this guy that we like because, number one, he's a huge underdog. Everything goes wrong for him. But number two, he's been trying so blasted hard that we just love him. You'll see this happening a lot in films and stories. The introductory scene doesn't necessarily directly relate to the plot, so instead they show the character being proactive or show some of these other things in order to establish them for us. Okay? Questions on this? Now, Brandon, what if you don't want your character to be sympathetic? That's all right, but you're going to have a hard time doing it. Because even if you show them being evil, if you show them being proactive, there's going to be something compelling about that character. This is why we like villains. And it's not a bad thing to have a character who is kind of running down the line that is mostly evil, but we like them and are fascinated by them because they're actually doing things, because they have depth, because they're consistent. Because they run into problems and overcome them, we're going to like them. And this is a good thing to do. Okay? All right. So, let's talk about kind of the harder ones. The depth and the quirks. Okay? These other things are actually fairly easy to do once you get the mindset of them. Keep an eye on this one. That's the one that people slip on the most, okay? It's by making their characters not do something. This is a problem when, I mean, you want to make them proactive and you want to make their problems personal to them. You know, yeah.
Now, so this is going to make the character more likable, and is...
It's going to make the story more interesting also.
Okay, and that's kind of my question. Is this going to help involve the reader in the plot?
Yeah, it's going to. They're going to be more interested if they feel like they've got a proactive character. If they have a character who's standing and watching the action, the story is going to feel static to them. That's not to say you can't do it. You can break any of these things, but you want to be aware of them. And knowing how to do some of these things are especially important if you want to have a character who's a little bit unlikable at the beginning, that is a growth character. Some of you may have tried to write these stories. How do I write a character that no one likes at the beginning? Well, you can make them unlikable for whatever reason, then do all these other things, and they'll still be sympathetic and interesting, even though we don't like them. A great example of this, the person who's best at doing this, I think, if you haven't read Name of the Wind, I've mentioned before. I don't really like Quoth, the main character. You know, he's not something I really want to hang out with. He's kind of a jerk. He's got a really bad temper. But he's fascinating to read about because of all of this other stuff. Okay? The problems, the proactivity, the expertise, all of this stuff makes him a wonderful character. People love to read about him, but he's not that likable. So if you want to have an arc where someone goes from having kind of some unlikable characteristic to going toward becoming more likable, what you want to do is you want to make sure you're hitting these other things pretty hard so that we have other reasons to identify with them and want to read their story. It's actually not that hard if you understand this kind of this balance and this makeup. If you don't, then you just make an unlikable character who is not proactive and sits and grumbles about everything. It has to be forced to do everything. It's the big mistake I see with people who want to make kind of the sarcastic, young, like YA protagonist who doesn't want to be on this adventure and stuff like that. They make them unlikable, and then they take away all these things, and the book is just a bore. It's like pounding your head against the wall. Where on the other hand, if you make them kind of sarcastic and a little bit mean, but you give them all of this other stuff, then we're gonna love them. The dude from the Rapunzel movie, Tangled. He is not a likable person to start. The first thing you see of him is him backstabbing his buddies. Okay, but he is really good at stuff. Okay, he's really glib, and he's really funny, and he's really good at stealing stuff. And so he's also extraordinarily proactive. You mix these two things together and add in some problems, and we're willing to like the guy as he becomes a better person. And the movie, it's a fantastic film for basically these reasons. Okay? So, the hardest ones on here I feel to do are depth and quirks, which are kind of the same thing. This is easy to do if you remember it. It's easy to forget, so it becomes harder than it should be, even for professional writers.